This week was really important. It marked the start of a new chapter in God of High School. I really like the direction the anime is going, and this episode is the first time where I would say the anime did a better job than the webtoon in covering this section of the story. Even though this episode was amazing, there was still some things skipped in it, so I'll be going over everything the anime skips to give you guys a fuller understanding of the story. God of High School Episode 6, Fear/6, covering chapters 20, 22, and chapters 39 through 35. Just like last week, since there weren't that many changes, I'll be going in order of the anime, explaining each scene's corresponding chapters in the webtoon and anything that was left out. The episode opens up with Nox talking to Taijin. They're trying to convince him to come with him somewhere, but he obviously denies it since we know the type of character he is. Then we see Mori falling asleep, wondering about his grandfather. There's not really any differences here, it's just a change in order. In the webtoon, it opens up with Mori wondering about Taijin and what he's doing right now and just if he's safe in general, and the same chapter closes with Taijin's encounter with Nox. This really isn't that big of a change, just a change in order, so it doesn't really even matter at all. After this scene, we get the opening of the anime, and then we get an anime-only segment. The nurses are doing a recap, and it's in this cool webtoon format, kind of like we saw last week. But unlike last week, we also get Commissioner Q and Commissioner O announcing that it's a 3-person team format, and they also say that there needs to be a match between Mira and Jaihee. The webtoon takes a slightly different approach, but the information is still covered nonetheless. In the webtoon, Mujin is having a conversation with Commissioner S. They're also shown being a lot closer in the webtoon than they are in the anime, but this still isn't really that big of an issue. During their conversation, Mujin casually tells Commissioner S that it's going to be a 3-person format, and there needs to be a match between Mira and Jaihee to determine the 3rd and 4th place contestants. Even though the same information was covered, I actually did like it a bit more in the webtoon because the information was presented to us as the audience a lot more naturally. In these recap scenes with the nurses, it's really apparent to the audience that it's just an info dump, so it was a lot more natural and it flowed better in the story in the webtoon. Then we skip to chapter 41 for the next scene in the anime. It's the fight between Mira and Jaihee. In the anime, the fight's really not that big of a deal. Jaihee does some flips and stuff, but Mira uses one attack and ends up one-shotting him with it. It's slightly different in the webtoon, and it makes Mira look even better and Jaihee look even more worthless. Mira beats him without his sword, which makes her seem even more impressive since most of her attacks are with a sword and that's what she's known for. After this fight ends, we go back to chapter 39 with the commissioners having a conversation discussing 3 important things. Firstly, the change in format for the national tournament. Secondly, Nox's recent actions in coming out of the shadows. And finally, summoning the 6. This scene of the commissioners discussing these things actually wasn't in the webtoon. It was actually a part of the conversation between Mujin and Commissioner S that I mentioned a bit earlier in the video. The same topics are still discussed and presented to the audience. The main difference here is in the webtoon, Commissioner S is shown as being someone almost 1 tier above the other commissioners, but not at the level of the rest of the 6 yet, especially since Mujin has a more personal relationship with Judge S. Now we move on to the first big anime-only scene of the episode. Even though it's anime-only, I'd say that it best covers chapter 20 in the webtoon. This anime-only scene shows the trio walking home from the God of High School tournament. It includes Mori's usual antics and problems as he's getting super excited about wanting to fight, and as he's going on one of his little speeches about wanting to get stronger, he falls behind Mira and Daiwi a little bit, and when he falls behind, he walks past Bongchim. This is his first encounter with Bongchim in the anime, and it was actually vastly different in the webtoon. As I said before, in the webtoon, Bongchim actually met Mori for the first time in chapter 20. Story-wise, this meeting took place before Mori's fight with Q. To help you guys understand how their meeting occurred, there's some things that were different in the webtoon. First of all, Mori was being held at the God of High School facility overnight, and he also received the Sage Pill from Bongchim. So what happened was Mori woke up at around 3 or 4 a.m. where there was no one else in the God of High School tournament facilities besides him and Bongchim. He didn't know Bongchim was there initially because he was actually locked up in a room, and the only person that knew the password to get him untied was Mujin. Mori was almost sleepwalking in a sense, and he sensed food or something coming from Bongchim's room, and Bongchim also lured Mori to it with his voice. When Mori got there, he accidentally ate the dangerous sage pill thinking it was just a regular fruit, and he guessed that the password was Taijin Jin because that's his grandpa, he just randomly guessed it. So when Bongchim figured out that Mori guessed this password and the relationship between him and his sworn enemy Taijin, he took it out on Mori and jabbed him in the chest, knocking him out for the next 10 hours or so. So as you've just heard, the meeting in the webtoon and the anime was very different, but overall, I don't think it really makes that big of a difference because they both serve the same purpose and it doesn't affect their interactions later in the story. The next part of the anime covers chapter 22 and it shows Mujin's first interaction with Bongchim. Mujin comes to get Bongchim because he needs to gather all of the 6 members in order to counter the rising threat of Nox. They have a little scuffle, so when Bongchim first gets up, he jabs Mujin through the chest, but it turns out that what he jabbed was actually some sort of clone and the real Mujin was standing behind him. In the webtoon, the only difference is this scene is a lot longer. They have a full-on fight, even though neither of them are really trying to kill each other, it's just a lot more action-packed. It really didn't make sense for Mujin and Bongchim to have such a long, drawn-out fight like they did in the webtoon. It almost seemed like it was a fight just for the sake of a fight. So I actually like what the anime did here, just making a quick little introduction of the characters. So now going back to the anime, after their little scuffle ends, they start talking about Taijin, Nox, the tournament, and everything that's happening around the world at the moment. Then we get a quote from chapter 41 of the webtoon where Bongchim says he wants to train Mori. The only difference is that in the webtoon, Bongchim's not with Mujin at the time, so he tells someone to inform him that he'll be training Mori, but in the anime he just tells Mujin to his face, which yet again makes the story less convoluted and just makes a lot more sense. Then the next part of the anime jumps back to the skipped chapter 40 to see Taijin's fight against Nox. It's pretty similar in both adaptations and all of the key things are hit. Taijin uses the kick which destroys the terrain, but there's also one small difference in the webtoon. The webtoon shows 3 important Nox members while the anime only shows the henchman and the leader. Although these important characters aren't shown here in the anime, 2 of them were actually shown a few episodes ago upon the initial introduction of Nox. It showed the blue-haired boy, the pink-haired girl, along with the person that traded Mansyok a few episodes ago. One other difference is that the webtoon makes it clear that Taijin either got captured or he's dead. This is yet again another good change in favor of the anime. I like how there was more of a mysterious aura around Taijin and what happened to him in his battle with Nox in the anime. It doesn't really imply that he's dead or captured, and we don't know whether he took the attack from the leader of Nox or whether something terrible happened to him. And then we go back to chapter 39 to cover the parts that were skipped. Mira goes to the store and she meets the announcer of the tournament, Bongsa. They talk about her sword style and he offers her some words of encouragement before the national tournaments begin. Another thing that was in the anime is that they foreshadowed a suspicious looking bunny. The same exact thing happened in the webtoon. It was adapted almost panel to panel, but instead of a bunny, Bongsa just senses that there's some sort of evil presence watching him. The next 2 scenes are anime only scenes, but I really appreciate their inclusion here, as it just tied together some loose ends on the webtoon and things that were implied to happen but we weren't completely sure about. The first is Daiwi's conversation with Mujin. They're just talking about the rest of the national tournament and Daiwi asks him some questions about Cheriok. In the webtoon, Daiwi just suddenly knows about Cheriok and talks to Mori and Mira about it, which really doesn't make sense, so this conversation was actually a really good addition. The next scene is Mori at a park. He's training, just thinking of ways to get stronger. Then he sees some kids trying to get a balloon that they got stuck in a tree. He goes to get the balloon, but when he jumps off, he slightly tweaks his ankle, but lucky for him, Bongchim's able to use acupuncture to heal his ankle, making it back to normal. This scene was also a good addition because in the webtoon we don't really see Bongchim and Mori interacting much after their initial meeting. After these scenes are finished, we pick up where we left off with Mira and Bongsa. After they finish their conversation about Mira's sword style and how she can improve her strength to battle in the national competition, Bongsa senses something dangerous and he ends up fighting the bunny who reveals himself as a Nox member. As I said before, he wasn't hiding in a costume in the webtoon. This Nox member was just stalking Bongsa, waiting for a good opportunity to strike. It's no big deal and both adaptions end up skipping the fight between Bongsa and this Nox member. but we do see the aftermath of the fight more clearly in the webtoon. It actually makes sense that it was saved off in the anime to draw suspense to the audience not knowing what happened in the fight. The next scene shows the interaction between Jigal and Ilpyo, with Ilpyo winning the match of rock, paper, scissors, then saying he lost after getting rid of Jigal's Chariok. There's another slight difference in the webtoon. Jigal's Chariok and Ilpyo's Chariok aren't shown. Jigal just leaves after comparing his GP to Ilpyo's, knowing that his is higher, and smirking. Then we go back one chapter to chapter 43 to see the introduction to a new team. This is the team that's going to be fighting our protagonist in the first round of the tournament, and this introduction is the same as it was in the webtoon. You'll see the introduction to Jugok, and yet again this introduction is also the same as the webtoon. After Jugok's introduction, we see a montage of all of the 6 members being summoned, starting with Jugok's grandfather. We actually get the same kind of montage in the webtoon, but it happens a few chapters earlier in chapter 41. The next scene combines chapter 42 and 44 of the webtoon. I actually like it a lot better this way because it's less convoluted and ends up saving time while improving the story. The scene shows Mira and Daiwi entering Mori's house and seeing that he lives alone. It also shows them feeling compassionate after seeing the picture with his fake parents. Mira tells Mori and Daiwi that her shoulder's feeling a little stiff, so Mori heals her with acupuncture. In the webtoon, this part was split. Daiwi and Mira went to his house in chapter 44, but back in chapter 42, Mori healed Mira. It also gave us a lot more information about how Mori learned his acupuncture techniques. In the anime, it was just implied that Mori probably learned it from Bongchim after they met in the park, but in the webtoon, Bongchim and Mori don't have much of a relationship. In the webtoon, Bongchim actually got one of his friends, who was another old lady, to teach Mori about the acupuncture fighting style. She taught him about it while Mori was taking care of her, so he kind of learned it without realizing that he was. Besides this scene, there's also one other thing that's skipped from chapter 42. It's Mori's first introduction to Jigal and Ilpyo. As he's with Mira and Daiwi, he informs Mira that he's able to tell someone's weaknesses now just by looking at them. She points to Jigal and Ilpyo and asks what their weaknesses are, but Mori informs her that they don't have any. This actually really scared Mori because it's the first time that he's looked at someone and came to the conclusion that they had no weaknesses. This really just further hyped up Jigal and Ilpyo, but at the end of the day it wasn't really necessary, and I guess it makes more sense to keep Jigal and Ilpyo a bit more mysterious in the anime for now. The next portion shows the commissioner's reaction to Bangsa getting murdered by Nox member Drake. It was a lot more emotional in the anime because they all found out together at the same time while watching the news. In the webtoon, Mujin found out about it separately from the other commissioners while on a plane ride, and he actually called them and informed them of it. They also really seemed not to care about Bangsa as much in the webtoon, because in the anime they all seemed very distraught and scared and just sad that their friend died, where in the webtoon the only reason why some of them get a little mad is they feel insulted that someone would have the nerve to attack a commissioner. Then the rest of chapters 43 and 44 were all covered in a montage introducing all of the competitors. In the webtoon, we were given a little more details as each of the competitors had slightly more screen time, but I actually think it was better to show them in a montage in the anime since most of them are pretty much irrelevant. The episode ended covering chapter 45, showing the attack on Commissioner Q. The anime is a lot more suspenseful here, showing Commissioner Q presumably unconscious with a giant metal pole sticking through his midsection. In the webtoon, all we get is the bag he was holding cut in half with some implication that someone's there to attack him. Besides this scene, there was a little more of chapter 45 that was skipped. Mori ended up meeting the first team he's going to compete against, as well as a 6th member at the same time. 6th member was Haoyang, leader of the Homeless Association, and he scammed both Mori and the leader of the opposing team out of their money. This scene was also kind of random in the webtoon, and it does make sense why it was cut from the anime, but unfortunately I don't think it's going to be shown in a later episode because it wouldn't make sense continuity-wise, as this interaction should have occurred before their fight, and it seems like the fight's gonna start at the beginning of next episode. And with chapter 45, that's it. This episode was really great. The episodes are getting more and more faithful week by week. The The episode didn't have any major skipped content, and I think the restructures in this episode only helped to improve the story and made it a lot less convoluted overall. That's it for this video. If you have any suggestions or just love God of High School, leave it in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.